In today's lesson, we will talk about how to use commas. People think commas are tricky, but they're actually very simple to use if you remember a few basic principles. If you would like more videos like this, please subscribe to our channel. We can use commas to separate 3 or more items in a list. For example, I bought 2 apples, 1 banana, and 1 orange. We are separating the 2 apples, a banana and an orange. If we don't use commas, this sentence will be confusing. It would sound something like this. I bought 2 apples, 1 banana, and an orange. The commas give us a place to naturally pause when we are speaking. How about if we were to write, I bought 2 apples, 1 banana. We're using a comma in this sentence, but we only have 2 items in this list, the 2 apples and the banana. So it does not make sense to use a comma. It's better to use and instead. I bought 2 apples and a banana. I've been to Kenya, Ghana, Congo, and Nigeria. The people are beautiful, welcoming, and lively. In this example, we are separating countries and adjectives from one another. Notice that we always use a conjunction before the last item in the list. In this example, we are using the conjunction and. You shouldn't use just a comma before the last item. You should use a comma and a conjunction like and or. 2. Use a comma to separate independent clauses that are joined by a conjunction. Examples of conjunctions are and, or, but, yet, so, etc. Let's pause here for a second to talk about independent clauses. An independent clause is a clause or sentence fragment that can stand alone as a sentence. For example, she loves to read novels. A conjunction is a word that connects clauses or words together. Some examples are and, or, but, yet, etc. For example, the car was black and red. Let's go back to commas. We can use a comma to separate independent clauses that are joined by a conjunction. For example, I wanted to buy a hoodie from Stevie's, but it was too expensive. This sentence has 2 independent clauses that are connected by a conjunction. The first independent clause is, I wanted to buy a hoodie from Stevie's. This is only part of the entire sentence, but it can also stand alone as its own sentence. The other independent clause is, it was too expensive. Again, this is only part of the entire sentence, but it can also stand alone as its own sentence. Both of these independent clauses are connected by the conjunction, but. We separate the 2 independent clauses with a comma. Use commas when we name or address the person to whom we are speaking. Good morning, Amanda. I am saying good morning to Amanda. I understand what you are saying, Sammy. Here, I am addressing someone named Sammy. John, I hear you. I am addressing someone named John. Use commas around appositives, which are nouns or noun phrases that define or identify another noun. Sarah, an avid reader, recommended a fantastic book. In this sentence, an avid reader is the appositive phrase. Notice that it's a noun. It further defines Sarah, whom we just mentioned. If you remove the appositive, the sentence will still make sense. Sarah recommended a fantastic book, but the appositive gives us a little more clarity and information about who Sarah is and why we should pay attention to her recommendation. Notice that the comma comes before and after the appositive phrase. Dr. Smith, the renowned scientist, is giving a lecture tomorrow. In this sentence, the appositive is the renowned scientist. It provides more information about who Dr. Smith is. As in the previous example, notice that the comma comes before and after the appositive. 5. Use commas around non-restrictive clauses, which are clauses that provide more information about a noun. This is different from an appositive phrase because the appositive is usually a simple noun phrase, whereas non-restrictive and restrictive clauses are more complex. They usually begin with who, whom, which, that, and whose. Non-restrictive clauses provide non-essential information about a noun, meaning that we don't need this information to understand the sentence. We use commas before and after non-restrictive clauses. Restrictive clauses are different. because they provide essential information about a noun. We do not use commas around restrictive clauses. We need the restrictive clause to understand the noun that it refers to. Normally, non-restrictive clauses begin with which, who, or whom. Let's go through a few examples. Her new apartment, which she decorated with a lot of care, looks beautiful. Here, we have a non-restrictive clause, which she decorated with a lot of care. This provides more information about her new apartment. It's non-essential information, meaning that we don't need it to understand which apartment we're talking about. We already know it's her apartment. If we remove this part of the sentence will still make just as much sense. We insert a comma before and after the non-restrictive clause. The apartment that has the large balcony is available for rent. In this sentence, we have a restrictive clause that is providing essential information about the apartment. Notice that the clause begins with that, which usually tells us that the clause is restrictive and therefore an essential part of the sentence. We don't put commas around restrictive clauses because they're an integral or important part of the sentence. This clause, that has the large balcony, is important because it tells us which apartment we are specifically referring to. Without this clause, the sentence doesn't make sense. It would be, the apartment is available for rent, and naturally we would ask, which apartment? Well, we're talking about the apartment that has the large balcony. So this clause is definitely crucial to the sentence. To reiterate, we do not use commas around restrictive clauses. 6. Use commas after introductory phrases or words that come before the main clause. Nevertheless, the trial will continue. The main clause is, the trial will continue. Nevertheless introduces that main clause, so we insert a comma after nevertheless. In the beginning, there was light. The main clause is, there was light. The introductory phrase is, in the beginning. When I walk to school, I get leg cramps. We can think of this sentence in two ways. The first part of the sentence is the dependent clause, meaning that it depends on the rest of the sentence to make sense. We can't just say, when I walk to school. When you walk to school, what happens? We need to know what comes next for the sentence to make sense. We use a comma after this dependent clause because it precedes or comes before the independent clause, I get leg cramps. Remember that independent clauses are sentence fragments that can stand alone as an independent sentence. You would not use a comma in the following sentence. I get leg cramps when I walk to school. The dependent clause now comes after the independent clause, so we do not use a comma here. Only use a comma when the dependent clause comes before the independent clause. This is very important to remember. 7. Use commas before and or after direct quotations. So normally you'll have a subject, then a verb, then a comma, and then whatever the speaker is saying in quotation marks. The subject is the speaker, and the verb is usually a form of speaking. So verbs like to say, to announce, to yell, some form of speaking. For example, he said, I'm going to the store. He is the subject. Said is your verb. Notice the comma comes after the verb, but before the quotation. This is something you'll see often in books, novels, short stories, and other pieces of creative fiction. Do not use commas around indirect quotations, meaning that you've paraphrased or reworded what someone said. Instead of using quotation marks, you'll normally say something like, he said that he was going to the store. The word that tells the reader that we're paraphrasing the original quotation, so no comma. The teacher announced, comma, please turn in your homework by Friday. In this example, the subject or speaker is the teacher. The verb is announced. Remember that this is a form of speaking, and the comma comes after the verb announced. I've underlined the quotation as well for your reference. I dislike performing, said Lee, because I get nervous. This format is slightly different from the previous examples. This time, the quotation is broken up into two parts. The speaker is Lee, and the verb is said. In this example, the comma comes after the first quotation but before the verb, and the comma comes again before the second part of the quotation. So think of the comma as separating the two parts of the quotation. Use commas for addresses, dates, numbers, and titles. For dates, use commas. For example, it's August 18th, 2024. The comma comes after the date and before the year. Sometimes the date is written day, month, then year. It's the 18th of August, 2024. We do not use a comma when the date is written in this format. We can also write the date in this format. Day of the week first, then the month, then the date, then the year. In that case, the comma comes after the day of the week and after the date, but before the year. It's Sunday, comma, August 18th, comma, 2024. Let's talk about addresses. I live in Toronto, Canada. In this instance, the comma separates the city from the country. You can also use the comma to separate the city from the province or state. I live in Toronto, Ontario. We also use commas in numbers. Normally, these are numbers that have more than 3 digits. Every 3 digits, we use a comma. Think of it kind of like how we use hyphens in cell phone numbers. Every 3 digits, you have a hyphen, and that makes it easier for someone to process the number. 3,500 people attended the concert. So you start from the right, and every 3 digits, you insert a comma. 0, 0, 5, comma. 4 million people attended the concert. Same idea here. We start from the right of the number, and every 3 digits, we insert a comma. 0, 0, 0, comma, 0, 0, 0, comma. We also use commas in titles or credentials. For example, Jacob Smith, comma, MD, comma, PhD. This is an excerpt from Mark Twain's novel, The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. Great read, by the way. Please go through this passage and insert commas where appropriate, based on the rules we discussed earlier. I hope you've had a chance to go through the passage. Let's go through it together. The widow Douglas took me into her home to live, but I did not enjoy living in a nice house. In this first sentence, we have 2 independent clauses. The first part, the widow Douglas took me into her home to live, can stand alone as a sentence. So this is an independent clause. There is a second independent clause in this sentence. I did not enjoy living in a nice house. This clause also makes sense on its own as a sentence. The 2 independent clauses are joined by the conjunction but. Remember our rule. We can use commas to join 2 independent clauses together that are connected by a conjunction. So the comma goes before but in this example. I put on my old clothes and ran away and was free and happy. But Tom Sawyer found me and said that if I wanted to join his club and be friends, I would have to return to live with the widow. I know this is a very long sentence, but stay with me. Where do commas go in this sentence? In this sentence, we have multiple independent clauses. The first part of the sentence, I put on my old clothes and ran away and was free and happy, can stand alone as its own sentence. This is an independent clause. The second part, Tom Sawyer found me and said that if I wanted to join his club and be friends, I would have to return to live with the widow. This is also an independent clause because it can stand alone as a sentence. They're joined by the conjunction but, so we can put a comma right here before but. Now, in that second independent clause, we can also insert a comma right here. Tom Sawyer found me and said that if I wanted to join his club and be friends, comma, I would have to return to live with the widow. Remember that we can use commas after a dependent clause as long as it comes before the independent clause. A dependent clause, just to remind you, is a sentence fragment that cannot stand alone as a sentence. It depends on the second half of the sentence to form a complete thought. So the if tells us that there is a second part of the sentence that we need in order to form a complete thought. We insert the comma after the dependent clause. For this reason, I returned to live with her. Remember, we can use commas after introductory phrases or clauses. For this reason is an introductory clause that introduces the rest of the sentence. Another way to think of this sentence is to think of for this reason as a dependent clause. This sentence fragment depends on the rest of the sentence to form a complete thought. The comma goes after, for this reason. The widow cried over me and gave me new clothes to wear, but I hated those new clothes. In this sentence, we have two independent clauses. The first independent clause is, the widow cried over me and gave me new clothes to wear. This is a complete sentence. The second part, I hated those new clothes, is also an independent clause because it can stand alone as a complete sentence. The conjunction but connects these two independent clauses together so we can insert a comma before but. I felt too warm in them, and I could not move my arms and legs freely. This sentence also has two independent clauses. I felt too warm in them is one independent clause. I could not move my arms and legs freely is another independent clause. Each clause can stand alone as a complete sentence. They are both connected by a conjunction, so we can include a comma before and. The correct sentence should be, I felt too warm in them, comma, and I could not move my arms and legs freely. When supper was being served, the widow always rang a bell, and I had to come quickly. The first part of this sentence is a dependent clause. That is, it depends on the rest of the sentence to make sense. The comma comes after the dependent clause. When supper was being served, comma, the widow always rang a bell. Now this sentence is interesting because it has multiple components. We can also break the sentence up into two independent clauses. The first independent clause is, when supper was being served, the widow always rang a bell. The second independent clause is, I had to come quickly. Both independent clauses are connected by the conjunction and, so we should insert a comma before and. I was happier when I could eat whenever I chose to, though this meant I had to make meals of the bits of food other people had thrown away. Here are two independent clauses joined by a conjunction though. We include the comma before though. Let's go through some other examples. Sarah, Michelle, Emily, and Meredith are hosting a party tonight. We have at least 3 items in this list. Sarah, Michelle, Emily, and Meredith. We'll use a comma to separate each item. Notice that the word and comes before the last item in the list. Remember, when we have at least 3 items in a list, a conjunction like and comes before the last item in the list. My cat, which was black and white, did not like Tommy. In this sentence, we have what is called a non-restrictive clause, which was black and white. These clauses, if you remember, usually begin with which, who, or whom, and provide non-essential information about a noun. In this case, the non-restrictive clause is giving us extra information about my cat. We should put commas before and after this non-restrictive clause. Garrett, bring the ball to me now. In this sentence, we are addressing someone named Garrett, so the comma comes after Garrett. That was a whirlwind tour on how to use commas. Here is a summary of the rules we talked about. There is also a free worksheet in the Google Drive for you to practice your commas. The link to the Google Drive is in the description box. If you have any questions, please email us at ccenglishcorner@gmail.com or comment below.